Hi there, and welcome to this lesson on plot and setting in literary nonfiction. So, the first thing we're going to look at is plot. A story has to be told in an order that makes sense. The order is what we call the plot. Plot is basically the storyline or sequence of events that take place in a story. It's what happens in a story. All stories have a plot, whether fiction or nonfiction, and all plots have a conflict and a resolution. A lot of times you'll see something along these lines. The technical name for it is Freytag's pyramid. We also like to call it the plot mountain or the plot scale. Depending on who the teacher is, you will sometimes see different elements on it, but most of them are the same wherever you go. So, there we go, many versions, similar components. So let's take a look at these components. The very first one is the exposition. This is the introductory material which often creates the tone of the story. It will give your setting, introduce the characters, and supplies other facts necessary for understanding the story. This may also include that inciting moment which sets in motion the rising action. This is where you know the character has something to do or complete by the end of the story. The second part is the rising action. This is where things begin to get complicated. Begins with the inciting moment, gains interest or power as the opposing groups or ideas come into conflict, and proceeds to the climax of the story. The next part of the story is that most exciting point. It's the turning point. This is what we call the climax. This is where the drama is at its highest point. Some change happens. Usually a big event or decision is made by the main character. The rising action concludes and reverses to begin the falling action. Sometimes, keep in mind, especially in a nonfiction, the climax of the story might be in the very beginning of the story or wait to the very end. Often in nonfiction, you'll see it in the beginning and then they might do a flashback leading up to that to kind of gain your interest in the story. Also, a lot of times the climax of a nonfiction story can be totally unrelated to the characters. It might not be a big event or a decision. It could be something such as a natural event like an earthquake or a tornado or something along those lines, or just something that happened to the character in their life and this was a turning point for them. So keep that in mind. The climax in a nonfiction is not always as dramatic as it would be in a fictional novel, so you have to kind of be on the lookout for a climax in a nonfiction piece. The last part of the mountain here is the falling action, or not last part, what comes after the climax. The falling action is what follows the climax and often exhibits the winding down of the climax. This is where if a character has made a decision, he or she has to live with the consequences and kind of, live out as the dice roll, as they say. And then that last little piece is the resolution. This is how everybody ends up in the story. The end of the falling action and the solution of the conflict. The resolution is not always a happy ending, especially in a nonfiction. It might be very nonchalant. It may include an explanation of all the secrets and misunderstandings connected with the plot. It might tie up loose ends, maybe exposure of a villain, clearing up of a mistaken identity, reuniting characters. Often, again, in a nonfiction, it's just kind of the point where the author decided this is where the real story ends, even though the life really does go on for those characters, because remember, characters in a nonfiction piece are going to be real people. So unless they've actually passed away, they're going to live on and there might be more to their story. You're just not getting it in this particular piece. Since every story has a plot, you can track every story on Freytag's pyramid. This includes short stories, narrative poems, novels, the entire novel beginning to end. You should be able to put on a pyramid, and sometimes you might have individual chapters which have their own subplots, or sometimes you'll have subplots running within one story. Narrative essays can also have a plot, and autobiographical incidents. Of course, keep in mind some stories change the order for excitement. They may reverse some parts, have flashbacks, or even skip to the falling action, but all of those parts remain in the whole picture, and this does apply to both fiction and nonfiction literature. Okay, if you have any questions on plot, please definitely ask your teacher. That's what we're here for. Let's move on and talk about setting. Setting is the time, place, physical details, and circumstances in which a situation occurs. Setting includes the background, atmosphere, or environment in which the characters live and move. Usually includes physical characteristics of their surrounding as well. So think about this. This is your big question here. How is the setting important to the story? Well, there are many answers for that. Okay, so let's take a look at what is included in the setting. Every story has to take place somewhere, including those nonfiction stories that we're looking at now. Everything about a setting can be important, so pay attention to it. The time of day can be important. Oops, I hate it when it does that when I click. The place can be important. Okay, such as the city you're in, the state, the country, the description of the place. It could be a certain room. We have red room with antique furniture, a broken down car in the desert. Okay, think about where these characters are and how their setting affects what's going on around them and maybe even their moods. The environment or weather. Okay, whether it's scorching hot in a desert, a blizzard in a cabin in the woods, the weather can definitely have an effect on the story. And also, setting can have to do with not just time, as in, excuse me, time period, but also the time period can affect the people in the story depending on their economics and their social class. So here you have a poor village with modest people or a mansion on a hill with wealthy people. All of these are going to create different settings, different expectations for the character and the people involved. So let's talk a little bit about the setting and the tone or mood of a story. Sometimes the setting provides details about the mood and tone of the story. For example, a story set in a haunted house would probably be filled with suspense and horror. A story could also be set in a historical time period, and that can affect the story. How might a story set in 1944 have a different mood than one set in 1946, for example? Let's see if you guys remember this. We did talk about this back in the fall. 1944 versus 1946. Did you get it? The fact that in 1946 World War II was over, but in 1944 the war was still going on. Think about the different perspectives of people in the middle of World War II, and then the perspective of the people worldwide after the war has finally ended. Much different mood. Setting and conflict can also be very related, okay? Other times the setting may be actually part of the conflict of the story. This is common in adventure stories in which characters become trapped or lost in forests, avalanches, and so forth, and we have plenty of nonfiction stories such as this. The setting may also provide the way in which the conflict is resolved. In such instances, a character uses a feature of the setting to his or her advantage. One nonfiction story that I can think of is I watched an interview with some of the bobsledders over at the last Olympics, and they were talking about the setting and how the temperatures had really risen during the Olympics, and they didn't expect it to be so warm, but what happened is that caused icing, and so the bobsledders were having a very hard time controlling the sled sometimes because they needed to make sure they were going in the right direction, and sometimes the sleds didn't want to cooperate on the ice. Other characters or other people, bobsledders, were saying how the ice actually can also be used to an advantage, because if they have a straightaway, they really gain speed, but they also have to be careful not to lose control. So that's a nonfiction example of setting and conflict being very interrelated. So review again, why is the story important? Okay, we have the setting of story can help the reader make sense of the plot. It allows the reader to better understand the characters and their motivations, can point to the tone or mood of the story. Setting can also help reveal the theme of the story, so be on the lookout for that. It can help create or solve the conflict of a story. All of the above. Keep all of this in mind. If you're ever asked, why is the setting important, just, go down, plot, characters, tone and mood, theme, conflict. All of this can be involved. If you choose any one of those, 2 or 3 of them to talk about, you will probably be golden on whatever it is you're asked to talk or write about. So that's it. If you have any questions, again, definitely let your teacher know. That's what we're here for, and we are happy to answer them. You can also K-mail your teacher or pick up the phone and call. Thanks. Have a great day.